Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is a really special event to launch Dr. Kerryn Phelps' memoir, Power of Balance. It's so wonderful to have so many of you join us as always to see all of those faces. I hope you can see each other. I'm your MC, Susie Bayes. I'm the head of community here at Climate 200. And do keep your cameras turned on if you're able. And just to let you know, this call is being recorded. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you tonight from the beautiful Gadigal, Bidjigal and Birribirragal land in Bondi. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Do let us know what country you're joining us from this afternoon in the chat box. This is actually the wonderful land that Dr. Kerryn Phelps was once the Member of Parliament for. I remember that time very clearly, but probably not as clearly as Kerryn does, and she'll share more tonight. It was many years before I was involved in Climate 200 or politics, and definitely my first taste of it. My friend had us all set up as a mini phone bank, calling friends' parents and the like to tell them to vote Kerryn to vote for climate. So that was back in 2019. And so we're all here to celebrate the launch of this wonderful new book, telling Kerryn's stories from that time and from beyond. So to give you the summary, Power of Balance is the landmark memoir from Dr. Kerryn Phelps that explores the events and ideas that have inspired her to create change throughout her lifetime. From medicine, media, politics, advocacy and activism, Kerryn has led a remarkable life of change-making in many domains. Kerryn was a pivotal front-runner in the community independence movement and has helped pave the way for many independent candidates and politicians who have followed since, the people that you've helped support, those of you who supported us along the way. Now, when you RSVP'd for this event, you received an email with a link to purchase Power of Balance through Booktopia with a 10% discount. We will put that link in the chat now and we'll share it again at the end of the conversation. If you haven't already got your hands on a copy of this book, this is your chance. So we'll send you an email out tomorrow as well with that discount link so you don't miss out. So this afternoon, Kerryn will be in conversation with Climate 200's convener, Simon Holmes at Court. We might have time for a few questions from the audience towards the end of the hour. So if you do have questions for Kerryn, please put them in the chat now or during the conversation. So now I'll hand over to you, Simon, and to Kerryn.
Thanks a lot, Susie. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And welcome, Kerryn. It's fantastic to be online with you tonight and with so many people from around the country. Really appreciate everyone joining us to celebrate your story and especially the launch of your memoir, The Power of Balance.
Thanks so much, Simon.
Thank you. And just want to put in context that I first met Kerryn as a member of Parliament. We hadn't met before, but I had accidentally become involved in the Kids Off Nauru campaign in late 2018. And it was at a time when our federal government was telling us that there were no children in detention, while all the time there was something like 200 children on detention in Nauru. And the crossbench, which Kerryn was proudly a member of, worked hard to put political pressure on the government to have them release those children, and then moved on to the Medivac campaign, which was probably the most humanitarian piece of legislation Australia has passed in relation to refugees in the last 15 years or so. And Kerryn invited me to come up to Canberra on a very important day when the Medivac legislation was coming through. And I was taken to her office by a volunteer, took me into office, the door opened, and it was teeming with volunteers from all the various refugee organisations, humanitarian organisations, World Vision, CARE, all sorts of organisations. And people were sitting on the armrests of chairs, laptops open, writing press releases. It was like a war room in support of human rights and refugees. It was just a beautiful place that day, and that was a seminal moment for me in understanding the value of that the independence gave civil society real access to Parliament and a fresh look at the critical issues facing Australia. So I'm still grateful to Kerryn for that window into Parliament and that first time that I really understood the power of independence. Kerryn, I'd like to start. This is very much about your book, and I'd love to start if you could please read us an excerpt from the book that helps bring us, the audience tonight, straight into the book.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'm speaking to you from Dharawal country tonight, and hello to everybody from wherever you are in Australia, and thank you so much for joining me to launch the book, The Power of Balance. So I'm going to be reading from the book, and I'm going to talk to you about Election Day, 20th of October, 2018. Election Day, 20 October 2018, started before dawn, with our volunteers setting up for the day, jostling for positions among squadrons of young Liberals and other party faithful in their light blue T-shirts, Labor volunteers in their red T-shirts, and volunteers and conscripts for minor parties and other independents. We had a catering team that went from booth to booth, delivering snacks, lunches and water, and checking on our volunteers' well-being. I tried to physically get to as many booths as I could on the day. We had hired the North Bondi Surf Life Saving Club so that our volunteers and supporters had a gathering place once they finished at the polling booths. It would either be a celebration or, more likely, a thank you and a chance to debrief with the people who had rolled up their sleeves to be involved in this new ignition of community-based politics. Polling booths closed and counting started just as massive black storm clouds rolled in from the west. We stood on our balcony in Potts Point, looking over the city and Sydney Harbour, and contemplated the past 6 weeks and the night ahead. At precisely 6 p.m, there was a low growl in the sky, then lightning, then a massive clap of thunder. Torrential rain started. Jackie and I saw it as a good omen. We came back inside, changed into tracksuits and flopped onto the couch, switching to the ABC on the television to watch the by-election coverage until it was time to head to North Bondi Surf Club. Our team of volunteer scrutineers had arrived at each polling booth. Some of our volunteers from the day stayed at their polling booths to supervise the counting. A small group of us gathered in our lounge room to watch the election count. Reports from our team on the polling booths had been really buoyant and optimistic, especially in the beachside and other more progressive-leaning suburbs. As the early numbers rolled in, we all looked at each other with incredulity. I was pulling votes from both Liberal and Labor. It looked like I was coming in a credible second, and the preference flows were favouring me. But would it hold as the count progressed? Dee and Darren had a lot more experience in election night analysis than I did, and they were looking very, very excited. Around 7:30 p.m, an hour and a half after the close of polls, Anthony Green made the call on the ABC election coverage. In his opinion, it was a clear victory for me. We were in shock. We had achieved the almost 20% swing we needed to win the seat, and the government had lost its one-seat majority. We cheered, hugs all around. Then someone said, "You'd better get dressed and go and join your volunteers and face the media." Jackie, Wendy McCarthy and I got into a car together and headed for North Bondi Surf Club. All of the news services were at the surf club, amassed at the entrance. It was the best place to be in the country that night. Jackie had organised the whole event. I really don't know how she managed it, in among the countless other things she had to arrange for the campaign. We had planned the music for the night. In the case of a win, the song for our entry was Macklemore's Glorious, a chance to start again. That was the mood of the room. Glorious. As we made our entrance, the room reverberated with cheers and the music cranked up. Everyone in the room started dancing. What we thought would be a party to thank all of our volunteers and supporters for such a huge effort became a victory celebration well into the night. Jackie and I walked up onto the stage and I spoke off the cuff from a few notes scribbled on a piece of paper in the taxi on the way to Bondi. I said that if we won the seat of Wentworth, it would make history. And my friends, we have made history today. This win tonight should signal a return of decency, integrity and humanity to the Australian Parliament, I said. This victory is for the people in Australia who need a voice. I am humbled by this privilege and I just want to say thank you. In an interview later that night, a journalist said, "We've never seen a post-election celebration like this. What are we seeing here?" Joy and relief, I told her. There was also an element of the miraculous in the result. We danced and celebrated for many hours into the night. There would be time to think about the ramifications of this fundamental change to the political landscape and to our personal lives in the coming weeks. This night was for appreciating the massive community effort that had culminated in this moment. Our post-election celebration felt more like a post-election dance party, not one of those political rallies or stiff cocktail party type events. It needed to feel different to the same old, same old. This was the hope of a fresh new era. The Sydney Morning Herald ran the headline, Kerryn Phelps kicks Liberals into minority government. The Sunday Age had the front page headline, Purple Rain. I was due to appear on the ABC's Insiders and on the early morning programs for the other networks. As I went off air at the ABC, I heard Peter Van Onselen in the studio say something like, I have information coming through that the postal votes are strongly in favour of the Liberal David Sharma. The result may not be as clear-cut as we think. That was the moment I realised that the result could actually still be in doubt, as there was no way of knowing how many postal votes were out there and which way they would flow. It seemed our victory dance might have been premature.
Thanks for sharing, Kerryn. So it turns out it wasn't premature. You won by a clear 1,851 votes. But it took a while, did it not, for Dave Sharma and Scott Morrison to concede defeat?
Well, they didn't concede defeat. We had to wait till we went to the Australian Electoral Commission's offices in Sydney to sit there for them to make the announcement and for me to then be declared the winner. And that meant that we had precious few weeks before we had to be in Parliament. And so I had to make a decision actually in that interim to go to Canberra at the suggestion of Cathy McGowan and Rebecca Sharkey and check out the office space. We had to start looking at employing people. We had to think about setting up an office space. We had to get across the legislative agenda, set up all of the processes that we needed to set up in anticipation of that announcement and be in Parliament in time for the 26th of November.
You didn't waste the moment, didn't wait for the Liberal Party to concede.
Well, no, we had to wait until the AEC made the announcement, so it really took it out to the last minute.
One thing that I remember hearing not long after was you don't just walk into a local electorate office and it's all set up for you, right? What happens when you win?
Well, when you take a seat from an incumbent, they strip the place bare. So when you walk in there, and I've seen other independents describe what happened when they walked into their offices, there's not a computer file, there's not a paper file, there's not a blank piece of paper, there is nothing but desks and chairs. And you have no idea what the active files are, you have no idea about where things are at in terms of the community groups that you need to be interacting with. So you really are starting from absolute ground zero when you walk into an office having won an election.
Sounds like a scorched earth policy almost.
So that's how I describe it.
So I really enjoyed your book, and I had known you primarily as a politician, and I was aware of your work at the AMA before. What I didn't realise is the number of times in your life you have been the first at something, that you have been you have broken ground, and I just want to list a few of those. And these come from your book. You were the first in your family to complete high school. You were the first in your family to go to university. The first female doctor to report on health issues on Australian television. The first same-sex couple to talk about marriage equality and same-sex parenting in Australia. The first woman to lead the AMA. The first woman and first independent to represent the federal electorate of Wentworth. The first woman of Jewish faith and the first openly LGBT plus woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. That's a whole lot of firsts. You've been first in pretty much everything you've done since, I think, a teenager.
I think one of the things about being a change maker is that you see the need for transformation or change. You see the need for social justice, and if you're in a position to do that, to make that transformation happen, then I sense a personal responsibility to do that. And so I guess that is the responsibility of the change maker, but it's also what makes you a change maker. And so
of all those, sorry, you go.
You don't actually think at the time, I'm the first to do this. Quite often that's a retrospective diagnosis. You sort of look back and go, oh gosh, nobody did that before. I knew it when I was AMA president, but in some of the other things, it was pointed out to me after it had actually happened.
Of all those firsts, is there one in particular that stands out to you as a real turning point for you?
I'd have to say that the one that really sticks out for me is being elected the first woman to be Australian Medical Association president at the federal level. The reason it was so significant to me was, firstly, I was the first woman in the position. Women had not traditionally had very much influence in the federal AMA or in medical politics. So that was significant. The other thing that was significant was that this was the year 2000. In 1998, Jackie and I were outed as a same-sex couple and started talking about marriage equality and LGBT plus issues. The following year in 1999, my medical colleagues elected me as president of the New South Wales AMA. And just a year after that, I was elected to lead the federal AMA, which is a very political, quite influential position in medical politics and in federal politics generally. So I think that really stands out.
So your time at the AMA was a bit of a baptism of fire of politics. You got to when we saw you go to Canberra, it wasn't your first time in the political realm. The AMA, and then tell us about the City of Sydney.
Well, the Australian Medical Association was a really, really important experience because you got to engage with politicians. You got to influence the debate around health policy. You got to understand how the press gallery works, how the political process works, how lobbying works, influence, and of course influence can be a form of power. Then City of Sydney was a decision that I decided to go into elected politics at local government level because it was local, which has a very big impact on health and well-being of communities. But it turned out that I couldn't be the independent politician that I wanted to be when I was elected on a team ticket for City of Sydney. And so I was faced with a really major dilemma about whether I just continued on whether I left that team and continued as an independent, which was the decision that I made. But it really reinforced my decision that for me, independent politics was where I needed to be if I was ever going to go into politics.
So rumours were circling that you were positioning yourself to run for higher office at the City of Sydney. But here we are in late August 2018. We had the Liberal Party falling apart. Many of us would have seen the Nemesis series recently and were possibly quite shocked just to see the level of distrust, if not even hatred, within that party. It came to a head in August 2018. Malcolm Turnbull put his prime ministership and his political career on the line and made it very clear to the party that if it didn't support him, he was out. As we all know, that forced a by-election. And all of a sudden, you had an opportunity and a big decision. Tell us, how did it come to be that you pivoted, or you put your hand up to be an independent candidate amongst a massive field at that election?
It was like there was this incredible swell of people in the community wanting change and people coming up to me and asking me if I would stand once Malcolm said that he was resigning and that there would be a by-election. It wasn't something I had considered. It wasn't something that I had any kind of ambition for. And when so many people started saying, how about you have a go at Wentworth, stand for Wentworth, I looked at the numbers and I thought, well, 17.7% buffer to overcome. I mean, that's nearly 20% swing. How on earth could anyone do that? And then we had a fledgling team that was looking at the feasibility of running a campaign for Lord Mayor of City of Sydney. And that team, I left them to make a decision and have a discussion about the prospect. And they said, yes, we're in. And so that was the core team that we decided to look at whether we could do it. And it took a couple of weeks to figure out whether logistically we could do it. But we were flying by the seat of our pants. I was saying to you earlier, Simon, I didn't even know what a core flute was at that stage. And here we were having to design and order them and put them up on power poles. We had to organise colours and T-shirts and volunteers and work out polling booth rosters and all of this, basically with very little time to be able to do that. I think we had about 5 or 6 weeks total to get everything organised from the get-go.
Was it exhilarating, that campaign? Was it fun, or was it terrifying or stressful? What was it like to be? Unlike a normal election where everyone is focusing on 151 balls or many personalities, the whole country was focused on this one electorate. Obviously, even heightened attention because it was the former Prime Minister's electorate. Were there 16 or 17 candidates that ran? But very quickly, it came down to a 2-horse race, you and Dave Sharma. So you had the eyes of Australia and the hopes of many outside Wentworth. Did you feel a lot of pressure?
I sensed the exasperation in the community on issues like the dysfunction in the current government. Dissatisfaction with lack of action on climate change was a really big one. The treatment of refugees. People were really upset, believe it or not, about live sheep export, even in Wentworth. The integrity issues and needing to see an integrity commission. There were a whole raft of issues. And what happened with the announcement of the Wentworth by-election was that every activist and special interest group in the country descended on Wentworth, and it was the only show in town for that whole period of time. So there was a tremendous focus, not only on the individuals who were running, not only on the parties that were running candidates, but on the issues. And Kids Off Nauru campaign you mentioned earlier, that was very active at that time, and in Wentworth got a lot of exposure and a lot of discussion, as did the issue of indefinite detention of refugees on Manus Island and Nauru. So it was an incredible focus of activity, an incredible focus of national and international issues, and not just local issues.
Well, it was quite an incredible event that the Parliament was put into the position of minority government. I mentioned the Nemesis series before. It amazed me that they did not mention once that Morrison's first 7 months was running a minority government. We hear the minority governments, that there's something inherently unstable or wrong with them, but that was actually Morrison's first 7 months. But it was a big time. You mentioned Kids Off Nauru and the Medivac time. For me, it was a moment when we got to see a crossbench form. It was Kathy McGowan, Rebecca Sharkey, Julia Banks, yourself, and then Adam Bant, Andrew Wilkie, and Bob Catter. Tell me, how did that crossbench work? You had the balance of power. You did cause the government to lose that. Was it the first vote, I think, in 90 years that the government had lost on a bill in the House? But how did you guys wield that power responsibly? And what was the relationship with the government at the time?
Well, Simon, you had a glimpse of the negotiations that were going on. My office was Medivac Central, and so all of the politicians that were having discussions with us were coming and going in my office in the back halls there. We had all the refugee advocates who were on the phone to their pro bono legal advisors. We were drafting legislation on the go. We were negotiating points of difference. We had the Labor Party saying, look, we can support this if, and then they had a whole raft of issues that they wanted addressed in any draft legislation. We had the Greens saying what it was that they wanted, and they were prepared to support it. We had a number of independents in the Senate, and so my office and my core staff were the ones who were actually pulling it all together and making sure that the negotiations were all heading in the right direction. But the first question that I asked when I spoke to the advocates is if we can achieve one thing with this balance of power for people in indefinite offshore detention, what would that be? And that's what became the Medivac legislation, being able to get people who needed medical attention to Australia for the care that they needed on the advice of doctors. It was really at the core of it, it was quite simple, but it was a complex series of negotiations. But what it showed me is that with the balance of power of a sensible centrist crossbench, you can achieve amazing things. You can improve legislation that needs improving. You can actually make legislation happen that needs to happen if one of the major parties is prepared to get behind it. And so it was an incredible time. It was a transformative time for Australian politics. I had wonderful advice from other crossbenchers, Cathy McGowan, Rebecca Sharkey, Andrew Wilkie, all provided me with the wisdom of their experience. Rebecca and Cathy were on either side of me when I was sworn in to Parliament. And what was very important about that time is that each one of the independents had their own independent view, but we were able to come to a negotiated agreement on the way forward. And I think, to me, that was like the best that politics can be, really, where you get an outcome that is sensible, practical, humanitarian, and it's done by good faith negotiations with a number of different entities.
And it was an incredible alliance and a real high point of Australian politics. That Medevac legislation was, I think, a watershed moment in the politics of the last decade. Unfortunately, the 2019 election came around so quickly. From October 2018, when you were elected, you barely had your feet under the table. Well, you got Medevac through, and then it must have been 6 or so weeks later that the election was called, the 2019 election. Tell me, so a very different election in that you're no longer the centre of attention for the whole country. You're just one of 151 campaigns. Your volunteers are probably still tired from October. Your donors are probably tapped out. What was that campaign like, 2019?
We probably never really got off a campaign footing. We were actually having to set up the office, get across the legislative agenda, because it wasn't just Medevac that was happening, there was the whole legislative agenda that was happening. We had to have a position and a comment on pretty much everything that was going before the Parliament. We had to work out how we were going to vote on everything. And then in the meantime, we never quite knew when the election was going to be called, because in Australian politics, it's a 3-year cycle, but there's quite a big window of opportunity where the prevailing government can actually say when the election's going to be, and only they know. And sometimes they don't even know. That's quite opportunistic. And so we had to actually stay on a campaign footing throughout all of that. And we had some of our volunteers that were sort of there in the office, helping us out with the logistics during that time as well. But once the election was called, it was full on election mode again. And we just had to maintain the energy. We had to maintain the enthusiasm. The problem was that we, as you said, didn't have the same attention from the national media. So a lot of what we had to do was in local activities and in social media. And, our volunteers stepped up again. Some of our donors stepped up again. We ran a bare bones campaign, doing the best that we could. We'd saved some of the corflutes from the previous campaign. We'd saved a lot of the materials from the previous campaign. So, it was a matter of doing what we could with the resources that we had and trying to make the case based on the track record of my time in Parliament from the by-election through to the federal election. So it was probably one of the most intense times in my life, and certainly in the lives of many of the people who were core to that campaign. As an independent, anyone who is an independent politician will tell you you cannot do this without your family, your friends, and your amazing volunteers who are prepared to roll up their sleeves and help you fight for what you believe in.
Did it feel different, the 2019 election, with as you were heading into election day? How nervous was the team?
We were hopeful, and on the day it looked like we might even win on election day. But again, the postal vote skewed against us, and this time it didn't come back my way. So I increased my primary vote, but unfortunately we didn't get. we didn't get enough to get over the line to get back into Parliament for a 3-year term. So, you know, in one respect, I was very disappointed that we weren't able to continue that journey. But on the other hand, you know, if you're a catalyst for change for other people to take on and other community campaigns to set up around the country, then, you know, that's part of the mission accomplished, isn't it? To show what can be done.
It was only about 6 weeks before the election that I established Climate 200, and we had a few dozen donors, and I was very new to the political system. I'd been inspired by what I saw in February in your office earlier that year. I'll tell you a mistake that I made. I assumed that once you're in, and what we really should focus on the up and coming campaign. So it is a regret of mine that we didn't realize early enough that you cannot take a seat for granted, and I think there's a real lesson in that for the existing MPs that are in, that it's so much easier to hold a seat than it is to win a seat, and you cannot take it for you cannot take that advantage for granted. You've got to go out early. If we could pretend that we're flies on the wall and you're talking to an incumbent MP, what advice would you offer above that?
I'd be getting organised now. And I think it's really important. What I'm seeing and hearing of the current incumbent independents is that they are working really hard, that they are hitting all the right notes in terms of climate action, integrity, and other issues of importance to their communities. I think that it's really important that that the campaigns are not just starting to plan, but getting really involved now, because you don't know when an election is going to be called. I mean, the Prime Minister has said he believes in full terms, but anything can happen. You know, circumstances could change and they could go early. So you need to be at least ready to press the button with all of the logistics ready to go once the election is called. But really, the campaign is one thing, but your track record as a member of Parliament is really what people are going to be judging you on. But there are other things at play as well. And, you know, in terms of what happened with the 2019 election, there were people in my electorate who did not want a Labor government. And so some people changed their vote accordingly. Now, we don't know what the sort of broader environment politically is going to be when it comes to, you know, whenever this next election is called. And whether there's going to be any kind of protest vote against the incumbent Labor government, whether there's going to be a swing back towards the Liberals. You know, there's so many things that are in play at the moment. But the thing that I would say to independent campaigns, if you are starting an independent campaign anew, that you should be getting organised now. If you are an incumbent and you are wanting to be returned, which hopefully they all will be, then I think it's really obviously important to keep up the momentum of what you are currently doing, of engaging with your community, maintaining visibility in the Parliament, giving speeches in the Fed chamber, asking questions in question time, all those things that the independents are doing. And, you know, I think, you know, what I'm seeing is that there is a drift of voters away from the major parties. They're looking for a home for their vote. And I think it's up to the independent movement to make the case for why they deserve to have people's vote.
Yeah, it's like two jobs though, right? There's the work in Canberra, but then very importantly the work locally. How did you manage that split? How do you know if you're giving, you know, and not doing enough on one or the other?
Well, when you're in Canberra, you're in Canberra, you know, and you have your electorate staff who are managing things for you. And then when you're in the electorate, you have a whole range of things that you need to do to engage with community groups, visit schools, go to Anzac Day ceremonies. You know, there's a great deal. I really enjoyed the electorate work. I really enjoyed going out and meeting people in the community and visiting the men's shed and, having a look at what people were doing in terms of supporting their community, things that you otherwise wouldn't have the privilege of seeing if you weren't in that position of being the local member and being invited to go along and have a look at what people were doing, visiting the surf clubs, seeing the junior nippers being trained, the next generation of volunteer surf lifesavers. There's so many things that you don't realise that actually keep a community ticking. And it's those community groups that do that. And that was one of the great privileges of that position, was to be able to really have a close look and engage with the people in the community. But that is part of the job. And it is a very, very important part of the job, along with what is possibly more visible generally, which is what's happening in Parliament if you stand up and ask a question in question time, for example.
Well, as we said, it's not a plot spoiler on how the 2019 election went, but you mentioned, just as an aside, that your primary vote increased. I want to just talk about it a bit more, just how cruel numbers are. In 2019, you garnered nearly 7,000 extra primary votes. So quite a shift of primary votes towards you. You increased your primary from 29% to nearly 32.5%. And so you had it on primaries, but if on second, third, fourth preferences, 1,073 people have just flipped the order of candidates, you would have become the 2019 the member of Wentworth from that election. Morrison government, which had a 2-seat majority, would have been reduced to a 1-seat majority. And if say one other independent had got up, say Julia Banks down in Victoria, who did pretty well down in Flinders, if any of the other independents had got up, we would have had a continuation of minority government. So it's just an amazing sliding door moment that didn't come down to the voters of Sharma v. Phelps, but came down to those who had cast second, third, and fourth preferences. So quite a sliding doors moment for Australia and obviously for yourself. But tell me that putting aside that great disappointment, the 2019 election saw two fantastic events: the election of Sally Steggall, another independent, into a seat formerly held by a Prime Minister. And we saw another momentous occasion when Helen Haines became the first independent to take a seat that had been given up by an independent. So a transfer of power, if you like, from a community independent to another one. You must have watched that Parliament closely, and you still had friends within it. What was the highlight for you of that Parliament?
I was so proud of Zali Steggall in Warringah and Helen Haines taking the baton from Cathy McGowan in Indi. I thought that was an incredible achievement. I think they both ran brilliant campaigns, and I think that they performed incredibly well in Parliament. I did watch their speeches and the proposals that they were putting forward in Parliament, with Helen, for example, continuing on with trying to get an integrity commission bill up, and Zali working on climate action initiatives, and so watching the performance of that crossbench, despite not having the balance of power, they were still making an impact. And I think that's the other message for the independent potential candidates and for the incumbents, is that even if you don't have the balance of power, you still have substantial influence. And influence is a form of power. And I think it's really important that we have people who are able to not have the party shackles around what they're able to say, but who can actually represent their communities in the Parliament and in those important debates that we need to have, not just in the Parliament, but publicly.
Yeah, I think those old narratives that minority government is dysfunctional or chaotic has been, all at the crossbench are just seat warmers. Those old narratives, I think, have really been put to rest by the example we've seen of sort of the lighthouse independence from Kathy McGowan through to yourself and Zali and Helen. Without those examples, I don't think that as many voters would have been as comfortable as they were in 2022 to vote independent.
I think you're right, Simon. I think people were able to see what a sensible, centrist, independent on the crossbench looked like in terms of the way they represented their communities. And there were a lot of communities around the country who said, we want a piece of that too. We want a representative who is not same old, as I said in my reading of the book. We want something that's fresh, that's new, that's different, that's going to change things up. And there was a transformation. And, Kathy being elected in Indi in 2013, retaining the seat in 2016, handing it over in 2019, me winning Wentworth with that massive swing in an urban seat in 2018, Zali taking her seat in 2019, the scene was set. I think people were ready for change. People were drifting away from the major parties. I think there was a frustration that both major parties were failing to act on climate change, that they wanted to see something different, and they'd seen an example of what different looked like. And I think there were a lot of communities around the country who was getting motivated, getting activated, and starting to think about how they too could have a representative who wasn't one of the major parties, who was an independent, who represented their views.
Susie's put in the chat that you can't be what you can't see is a pearl of wisdom, but obviously you need somebody to be the thing that hasn't been before. So I'm incredibly grateful for the independents that have gone out there and led. And it was in middle of 2021 when I'd made the decision that Climate 200 was going to support the growing independence movement that was growing so well past the conference that Kathy McGowan and friends organised back in February of 2021 that I believe you spoke at.
I was at that conference.
Something like 270 attendees from 72 electorates turned up. And so in the middle of the year when I'd committed going to do this thing, I approached you, Kerryn, and asked if you would join our advisory council. And there's an amazing group of people from John Hewson and Barry Jones to Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor, yourself, and 4 or 5 other luminaries. I really appreciate that you stepped up for that and gave us sage advice. But you've also been, you've lent a gentle word or been a sounding board for candidates and independent MPs along that in that time as well. You've shown a leadership role even since in this movement, even since leaving Parliament.
Yes, thanks, Simon. It's actually been a privilege to be able to interact with people who are considering running, because I think if I'd had the benefit of that advice, it also happened so quickly for me and so precipitously that we got thrown into that campaign without having a chance to, although I'd had a taste of Canberra, I knew what Canberra was, but you can't know it till you've really experienced it, I don't think. But if you've got the advice of somebody who has been there, done that, then I think that is really helpful. And I was happy to be able to provide that advice for people, to be able to help them with, how you go about setting a campaign up, what is life in Canberra like. I mean, just a few, pieces of advice that I hope were helpful. And as you said, the advisory board has a lot of wise voices there too.
I very much appreciate it. So I'm been given the signal that I'm getting near the end of my time asking questions. There's going to be questions from people in the chat. Please, if you do have some questions, put them in the chat, and I'll hand over to Susie in a second. But I've got one last question from you, for you. Just from I know that people who come to book launches are often interested in the process of writing, or in the, I guess, the sort of literary side of what's been achieved. Tell me, what kind of an exercise was it? You've written many books, right? 6, 7 books.
Yeah, I've written a textbook of general practice. I've written a range of health books about the brain, the gut, about general wellness, about cancer recovery. This is a whole other exercise.
Well, this is personal. This is personal, right? So what was it like? Well, what kind of a writer are you the kind of person who sits down and writes, thousands of words a day, or do you write a little bit? Was it hard to write about yourself rather than medicine? What was the process of writing for you?
I've always found it harder to talk about myself or write about myself than about issues or about medicine, for example. I've been a health communicator since my 20s. From not long after I graduated, I started working in television, radio, magazines, newspapers, and so I'm very used to talking about other people's health issues. But when it comes to actually sitting down and analysing not just events, but how you felt about an event, what thoughts were going through your head, and then double checking that to make sure that double checking your memory to make sure you got dates and times and things like that. And I'm a note taker. I keep files. I have clippings going back since before there was digital, media. So, going back through my whole career, 40 years. And so I was able to refer back to that material. I kept notes and cards that people have sent to me, so I'm able to refer back to what people were thinking, for example, at the time that Jackie and I were outed and people wrote to me. So I could go back and sort of get a sense of the impact of that at the time, and then to be able to write about those stories with emotional insight, I think was, a challenge, but it was something that I really wanted to do in an emotionally honest way. And so that's why I guess when you're reading through the book, you hopefully will get a sense of the journey in all sorts of aspects, not just the facts and what happened at the time, but this is what I was thinking, this is what I was feeling, this was my motivation at the time.
Well, I've got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and I'd only known part of your professional journey. You've shared in the book some of your personal journey, and it's it's a privilege to read a memoir of someone who shares that generously, that you move from reading about someone you admire to feeling like you have a connection, like a friend, reading the book, that you get to understand the person, the motivations, the challenges, the troubles and the triumphs. So I really appreciate that you took the time to do it and wrote so honestly, and I commend the book to anyone who wants to understand more about your miraculous journey so far. So thank you very much, Kerryn.
Thank you, Simon.
I'm going to hand over to Susie now for a few questions from the chat.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was just the most amazing conversation. It's just so great to hear the really candid insights from your life throughout, and really to understand your journey, like so many other community independents and who you've led along the way, how the insights of your life and being such a leader along the way, all of those different points of where you've been first were just amazing. But I think it's helped people really see how people become leaders in their lives and then decide to bring that to community independence and to become a community independent. So I've got to ask you one of the questions from the chat, which is, what are 3 or 4 leadership qualities that you think are essential for a successful independent candidate?
I look at leadership through a medical lens because that's who I am. The core of my identity is as a doctor. And so what we have to do in medicine is to listen, to investigate, to identify problems, to get expert advice where necessary, to identify the problem, and then formulate solutions. So when it comes to leadership, I think having some kind of formula for how you're going to approach problem solving, because basically leadership is about problem solving. But I think it's also really important that you surround yourself with people who you trust and who will tell you the truth. You don't want to just hear what you want to hear. You've got to be able to hear what you need to hear. The other thing too is that a lot of people think that you go into leadership, fully formed and fully prepared to be a leader, whereas there's a lot of the time where you might have gathered a significant skill set, but there are times when you just have to be prepared to just jump in the deep end and hope that the skill set that you have is going to carry you through. It's a bit of a sink or swim moment sometimes. And I think that you also have to be realistic about what you can achieve, but also there are times for negotiation and for sometimes tough negotiation. There are other times for confrontation. And with leadership, you don't always see what's going on under the surface. You don't always see the private, quiet conversations that might influence somebody's perspective or opinion. Sometimes you'll only see what happens in the media or happens in, for example, the parliament. So I think with leadership, having, and if I could make a final comment about leadership, is that you need clarity of purpose. And I do talk about this in the book, that you need to know what it is you're doing there and why you are either seeking a leadership position or in a leadership position. What is the purpose of you being there? And hopefully having an understanding of the landscape and having good advisors around you.
100%. And it sounds like you were able to take the ego out of it, which is an interesting thing within Australian politics. Somebody asked what surprised you about the culture of Parliament when you first arrived there? And I think that really speaks to how you saw your purpose and what you were just talking about with that. I'd be really interested to hear that.
On the one hand, there were things that I did expect, because I had spent 3 years in Canberra with the AMA, and there was a lot of engagement with politicians, the political process, as a lobbyist. But I had the backing of the entire Australian Medical Association's membership to back me up, plus all of their policy officers. So there was an enormous amount of logistical backup. One of the things that's a surprise is really how little support that you get. And we have more than the current independents have. And we had 4 parliamentary staff members, and this current group of independents, one of the first things that the current Prime Minister did was to cut that staff from 4 down to 1. I'm not sure how they do that. It's, that was a terrible thing to do to them. So the absolute workload was a bit of a surprise. I knew politicians worked hard, but the workload is tremendous, not just in Parliament, but the schedule of community work, but also some of the chicanery that goes on behind the scenes. I mean, it's there, but when it's actually happening to you, it's like, no, it didn't happen like that. And it's like, well, that's going to be how it's, presented. And so those are some of the surprise. I guess in a way they weren't surprises, but in another way, when you're actually experiencing it, it feels like a surprise.
I can totally understand that. I think I'm constantly surprised. And as I said, I wasn't originally in the political space, but the more I understand, the more concern there is. So in terms of, you've led the way so amazingly for communities to find their person and to find their candidate. What do you think are the characteristics of electorates who are ready to elect an independent?
Well, in my case, I had encouragement from the community to stand, and then once I did, the volunteers came and the support came. In other cases, communities have set up specifically to find a candidate, to vet candidates who are suitable for their electorates. But in terms of basically what community groups will be looking for will be a candidate who reflects their values, the values of their community. And in terms of what the characteristics of those communities are, they will be communities who are dissatisfied with their current representation, and who want to see change, who want to be represented not by one of the major parties or not by the major party that is currently representing them, but by one of their chosen independents.
Yeah, I definitely remember that in Wentworth in 2019 and again in 2022. It's an amazing experience, and that's one of the things, the joy that you really touched upon on on how this community independent movement really brings people together and makes them feel better with that kind of active hope. And you touched on starting early. How important do you think it is to start early, and what kinds of activities should happen at this earlier stage of a campaign, do you think?
We did so many activities to keep people engaged. So we started out with the campaign, which was really about getting out and about, door knocking, which I'd learnt during the local government campaign, and that's an art in itself. Getting to train stations, letting people know, who you are, what you stand for, having conversations with people. But we started things like politics in the pub, where we would, go to a pub and invite people to come and interact and have a chat. We would hire the local library and we would bring in experts, like Dr. John Hewson or Anne Summers or, people in the local business chambers, and we give people a chance to directly interact with those experts in the way that I was interacting with them, and they were excited about that. And we also did live streaming from Facebook on those events too. So that was like a hybrid event, which are much more common now, online and hybrid events, so that people who couldn't get out to an event were able to log in from home and have the opportunity to feel engaged. So it was really about taking community engagement to a whole other level. And these are the sorts of things that you can do with your community. Once you have an identifiable community independence group, then you can start organising those events, and they will grow as people are interested. We had meetings in coffee shops and cafes and all sorts of different opportunities. We had walk and talk events where we would say, if you want to talk to Kerryn and the team, then pop down to Bondi Beach at this time, and then we'd go walking along the Bondi to Bronte walk while we chatted and talked to people, and people would say hi on the way past. They'd stop and have a chat. So it was this really intense level of community engagement, which was really very exciting.
Yeah, love that. And that's exactly what's happening now all around the country. And it's one of the things that at a time where people really need community, they are able to connect and have this real positive hope for the future with other people who feel the same. So that's a lovely moment to close on, and we always do try and get you away on the hour, as I'm sure you all know. So I'd like to thank you both so much, Kerryn and Simon. Kerryn, your book is really, really exciting, and I'm really excited to get into it. It's been really great to get a deeper understanding of your journey and how that mirrors and has kind of led the way for so many people behind you and these communities. And that electric excerpt from the by-election day was really extraordinary. So thank you. I'm sure your story will continue to inspire the community, the movement, those people on the call tonight. And I'd like to thank you, everybody on the call, so much for your time. Just to remind you, you can purchase Power of Balance with a 10% discount through Booktopia. You'll get the link in the morning in the email, and it's been on the chat tonight. And some of you have asked whether there'll be an audio book. I can answer that yes, there'll be one soon. So that's very exciting. So thanks again to each and every one of you for joining us here tonight. It's just been great to see your faces. I've been watching everyone nodding along. It's just been fab. That concludes our time together tonight, but we really hope to see you again soon. And thank you all for joining us. Good night.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks, everyone.